I'm Lucy.
And I'm Jennifer.
You're listening to Everything I Know About.
Each week, we share everything we know about a new topic, equipped with some internet research and a little too much exposure to pop culture.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, everyone.
I feel like we need a new, cuter intro. We just always say hi and bye. I don't know.
We keep it casual here.
Yeah.
So today we have another random fact episode for you, but this time we are centering it around cults. And this was always a topic that we thought about tackling, but honestly, you just have so much cult content out there that if you're somebody that's interested in cults, you probably know pretty much all there is to know. Lucy and I have both read the book Cultish by Montell, which was a great intro, but also who hasn't listened to like multiple entire podcast seasons doing deep dives into some of the most popular cults? I know I definitely have.
Same.
Yeah. But today we are taking a little bit of a different spin. These are cults that you probably haven't heard of before. And if you have, you might just know a cursory overlook on what they're all about. I will be doing a deep dive into cargo cults, which I was just introduced to this week. I had no idea what they were. I randomly stumbled upon a TikTok about cargo cults, and I was like, this either is not real, and this is just TikTok BS, or I'm not getting the full picture. And it turns out that is true. So we will go very deeply into that. And Lucy, what cult will you be sharing with us today?
I looked into the Bikram Yoga cult. Have you heard of that one?
I actually watched a documentary on this one.
Yeah, there is a Netflix documentary.
Yes, I watched that one.
Honestly, it's pretty hard to find a cult no one has heard of.
That's true. But that is an underground one because it's not so obviously a cult at all.
Right. I feel like the more popular ones that everybody knows are like religious-based suicidal cults. Obviously, Jonestown. Cults are like its own niche, just like true crime is, where once you develop an interest, there's so many wormholes to go down. Anyway, the reason I chose Bikram was because I myself have not seen that documentary, so I didn't know a ton about it and I wanted to look into it. I guess where I'm at now is I'm more interested in cults that are maybe not so obvious, or like cults where it feels like it could happen to anyone. And Amanda Montell talks about this. In that book, she points out how like Soulcycle is cultish. So I wanted to look into Bikram because I feel like that was the OG manifestation of this type of fitness cult, fitness guru phenomena.
Yeah, totally. There are so many health and fitness style cults. Do you remember Freely the Banana Girl?
No.
No?
What?
Oh my God. Okay, I consider
Maybe
this a
we
cult.
should have done that one.
I consider this a cult, but it's this high carb, low fat vegan community. And they were really big on YouTube in like the mid 2000s.
Wait,
And
say it again.
there's-
It's a banana girl? Like, because she just eats bananas?
I mean, basically, yeah. Her name is Freely.
Okay.
So she was this Australian high carb, low fat vegan YouTuber. And she had this rockin' bod. She looked really hot. And she just had such a sassy personality. She'd be like, no wonder you're fucking fat. You're not eating 50 bananas a day. Just eat 50 bananas. And so people would just watch her videos and literally eat like 20 to 30 bananas for breakfast. And
Oh
then
my God.
go on a 15-mile bike ride. And then she would eat entire boxes of pasta, just plain pasta with nothing on it
Cooked.
for dinner.
Cooked, right?
Yes, cooked. Sorry, cooked.
You never know with these things.
Truly. But her whole thing was just eat a bunch of carbs and you will be skinny.
Wow.
And I totally fell into it.
No way. You
in
did not
college.
think that.
Oh, absolutely I did.
What?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I totally did this for like 6 months.
Holy shit. How many bananas were you eating per day?
I was eating a lot of fruit. I mean, I was in college, so this was like a great diet for me because it was senior year of college and I was poor, so I could just eat a shit ton of bananas and it was cheap. But I felt like crap. I felt like absolute crap. Like I would come home from the bars and like binge eat eggs because I was so deprived of protein. I would just cook like literally 6 eggs and just eat eggs because it was so weird. My friends still make fun of me for it to this day. Like it's a thing.
Okay, but if you did it for 6 months, like it was working for you?
No, it wasn't.
Why did you
working
do
for
it
me.
for 6 months?
Because it was a cult. I would literally be on the forums of this diet and being like, why is this not working? And they were like, well, what are you eating? And I'd be like, well, I had my 6 banana smoothie and I put some cocoa powder in it. And they're like, it's the cocoa powder. Like, even though it was like unsweetened
Oh my
cacao
gosh.
powder I was putting in there, they're like, it's that. That's messing with your hormones somehow. That's making you crave sugar. I'm like, there's no sugar in it. It's like a plant ground up. And they're like, no. So if you even deviated a little bit, they were like, it's on you.
Mm.
And then, yeah, it kind of went down because there were some other popular vegan YouTubers who were following the diet. Like there was this one girl in particular who was 19 years old and she was quite overweight and she was cycling a bunch and using the diet to try to lose weight and get healthy. I think she was pre-diabetic and her blood work just kept coming back worse and worse and worse. And she was like, what is going on here? And they were like, again, putting it on her, being like, well, you ate this one little thing that's not part of the diet, or like your mindset isn't right. And then after she kind of came out about how horrible they were to her, it started to crumble a bit, but now Freely is a little bit of a joke.
How did you get out of the cult? Was it because of all of that news coverage about this girl?
I mean, I was vegan for over 2 years and I wasn't doing like high carb, low fat anymore, but I was vegan. And
I didn't know that.
Yeah. I was just craving like weird meat all the time. I moved to New York City right after college and was still vegan. And I was like, oh, this will be great because there's like a ton of vegan options in New York. I would go to happy hour drinks and people would get like bone marrow was really popular at the time as an appetizer, like inside the bone. And I would see it and I would just be like, I want to eat that entire fucking bone. I want the bone marrow. And I was like, that's so weird. Why do I want that? And I would just like randomly crave like beef stew, all of this weird stuff. And then it turns out I have low iron. So that all makes sense. My body was just like, no, you need iron, you need meat. So I just started eating normal again. And it was great. Best decision I ever made. I love meat.
That's wild. I had no idea. Dang.
Yeah.
I don't have any experiences being in a cult, unlike you, clearly. I do have, somewhat addictive tendencies. Like I started going to the gym last year as a person who had never really worked out before. And now I go every single day. So I am definitely kind of addicted to that. And one of my favorite workouts is to do hot yoga. I didn't really know much about the roots of hot yoga, had heard of Bikram before as a type of practice. Have you heard of Bikram Yoga? Have you ever done it before?
I have, yeah.
Okay. What
I'm
was
not
the context?
a huge fan.
Okay, you did it at an official Bikram studio, or?
Yeah, it was official Bikram. It was back in my vegan days, so this is all tying together.
Classic.
Yeah, it was like the 90-minute full sessions, and it was too much. It's a really long time to be sitting in a hot room.
Yeah. It's also, if you're a beginner, I think it is one of the most intense forms of yoga. So to be doing that from day one is quite intense.
Yeah. No,
I do like 60-minute sessions, and I'm like, they get so hot, so I can't imagine doing 90 minutes.
Oh, it was hell, for sure.
Sounds like when you shed your veganism, you also just shed the yoga.
I'm masochistic in other ways now.
Now you're like a Peloton girl, so.
Peloton solid core girl.
Solid core, right?
I still get my torture.
You just moved on to a different cult.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so the history behind Bikram Yoga. Quick trigger warning, we do cover sexual assault. Okay, so Bikram Yoga was founded by Bikram Choudhury. He was born in Calcutta, India in the 1950s. He grew up poor. His origin story that he mythologized himself is that he was 5 years old and kicking a ball around a field, and this ball landed at the feet of a man who happened to be a yoga guru named Bishnu Charan Ghosh. Ghosh was a yoga legend, and Bikram started training under him, became his star student, and as a teenager was a 3-time national yoga champion. He was then forced out of competition because he was so good that they couldn't let him compete anymore.
Stop.
So he then took up weightlifting, and in 1960, he was the number 1 weightlifter in India, set to go to the 1964 Tokyo Olympics.
I'm sorry, is all of this true, or is this just his self-mythologized story?
This is his story. 7 days before the Olympics, a barbell fell on his knee and destroyed his left leg. Doctors told him he would never walk again, and he was like, no thanks, I don't believe you. He went back to his guru, Ghosh, who fixed his knee in 6 months. He said that inspired him to make yoga his life's work and spread it around the world. And according to him, that is the moment he began to reinvent yoga. So prior to that, gurus taught students one-on-one, and he wanted to teach thousands of students at a time. He also standardized his class, teaching the same set of 26 poses over the course of 90 minutes to everyone. Prior to that, yoga was very custom to the student. Okay, so that's his story, and it's funny because when you Google, to try to learn a bit about his backstory, plenty of websites out there report this as truth. He was super influential in the yoga community, so a lot of his students created their own practices, right? They all have websites, obviously, so you can sign up for their classes, and all of them write out the story as if it is truth. What actually happened is a little fact checking here. Competitions for yoga did not exist in India until 1974. So it is literally impossible that he could have been winning yoga competitions in the 1950s, 1960s. He is only confirmed to have actually studied yoga postures for 6 months under Ghosh, but he was actually focused on bodybuilding and massage. He won a single local lifting competition. And on the massage side, he was actually a professional masseuse who served Bollywood stars. By the time he left for Japan, he was on this mission to spread yoga to the world, and he was 26. He says Japan, he was only there for a year. He says that's where he invented hot yoga because the climate was a lot cooler than India, and so he brought heaters into the classes to help his students like stretch and get more of the effect as if they were in India.
Why am I already creeped out by this guy? Like, he's like a professional masseuse, and he's like, let's make it hot in here while we work out. Like, something is gonna go wrong already.
Yes,
The red flags are
absolutely.
flagging.
No, I mean, it's fascinating because, I mean, as is true with all the cult leaders, he's very charismatic. He like knows how to tell his story, right? This rags to riches story, if you believe it, certainly does appeal to anyone, right? You want to root for this guy. So he's been in Japan for a year and then he leaves to go to Hawaii. He has always wanted to come to America and spread his yoga. He says that his first student is Elvis Presley and his second student is President Nixon. And this is actually confirmed. I mean, it's kind of, yeah. No, I was kind of shocked. I was like, there's no way this is true. This is obviously more mythologizing. But there's this book called Calcutta Yoga by Jerome Armstrong, which is like a history of all of these yogis who started in Calcutta and then their influence as they spread. And that was a book that said all of his other stories were fake. But it did confirm this Presley and Nixon thing. The story with Nixon is that Nixon was in Hawaii. He had phlebitis, which is an inflammation of a vein in his leg. Bikram said that they wanted to amputate Nixon's leg, and he was like, no, he's the president. Like, I will fix his leg, and you will not need it amputated. And that because Nixon was so grateful, he got a green card from him.
I have so many questions,
Yeah,
but okay.
the man, the myth, the legend right now.
Look at that.
So in 1973, he moves to Beverly Hills and he opens the Yoga College of India. He quickly attracts a lot of celebrity fans. So some of these are like Raquel Welch, Martin Sheen, John McEnroe, Jason and Justine Bateman, and Shirley MacLaine. She kind of put him on the map. She put him on the Johnny Carson show. I was really interested in trying to understand like why his classes were so popular and how he was able to gain a following so quickly. There was a quote from this actress and she said, quote, "You know, we're used to being catered to in Beverly Hills and we come to Bikram to get our asses kicked." So he was like offering this type of yoga that was truly new for Americans. The yoga at the time was like stretching and not a real quote unquote workout. His classes were super intense. I mean, they were 90 minutes. You know, the room was 100 to 120 degrees. He would verbally yell at you, and he would claim that it was because he was the only one who would tell you the truth. Quote, "When you are 20 pounds overweight, I will tell you. You are 20 pounds overweight on your face, and you have to lose it. And if you think I'm insulting you, it's your problem. And I don't care because that's why you came to me. That's what you pay for. I must tell you the truth."
Oh my God.
So this kind of like tough love approach, people seem to really like. I also thought it was interesting that literally yoga mats were not invented at this time. So the studios were carpeted.
Oh, that's
They were like packed. Yeah, so they were super stinky and like packed with all these bodies, and everyone's wearing like these tiny clothes because it's so hot in there. He himself wears a black Speedo. That's his look. He wears that to every class. And outside of the like quote unquote hard truth, he's also making like very sexually suggestive body comments. I read this article from GQ that was written in 2011, where the author went to one of his trainings and he quoted Bikram as saying, "You, Miss Teeny Weeny Bikini, spread your legs. You, Mr. Masturbation, until I say change, you do not move a muscle." Oh, yeah. So very inappropriate, right? But it was normalized. Like, it was part of the culture. And at the end of this 90-minute session of him yelling at you, you being very physically exhausted, like sweating buckets, you would just lay on the ground and he would sing an Indian lullaby. And so you've got this ritual, right? It is like a probably very strange, but maybe, I guess, very spiritual, magical experience if that's your first, experience with anything like this.
He's like lightly trying to trauma bond you.
I mean, clearly, like, many red flags about how this man is treating other people, in addition to just the verbal abuse. So we're entering the era of him building his empire. Throughout the 90s, yoga was becoming more popular. In 1994, 6 million Americans were practicing yoga, and a decade later, that number had more than tripled. Madonna became a big fan. He was being talked about by a ton of celebrities everywhere. And he started taking advantage and really charging a lot of money to not only take his classes, but also to become trained as an instructor in the Bikram method. He would hold these training sessions at these luxurious resorts. They would last 9 weeks and cost $10,000 per student. And by 2006, there were over 1,500 Bikram yoga studios worldwide, led by these students that he trained. You know, he was getting licensing fees, obviously, for all of these studios. And so in this GQ article from 2011, it was estimating that he was earning about $5 million a year. And at this point, he has a mansion. He has more than 40 Rolls Royces and Bentleys. He still has these like quirky things that I think reinforce this cult of personality around him. Like he says he only eats a single meal a day, which is chicken or beef, no fruit or vegetables. And he only drinks water and Coke. And he only needs 2 hours of sleep at night. So
My man
yeah.
is on the carnivore diet, sweating that much. Hell no. Disgusting.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting because obviously now he's been accused of sexual assault and rape. And that started happening in 2013 when women started coming out and making allegations. But this article that I was reading was written in 2011. And even in that article, they covered the fact that there were stories about him having sex with his students. And the journalist asks him about it, and he doesn't deny it. He says, these students blackmail him only when they give me no choice. If they say to me, quote, "Boss, you must fuck me or I will kill myself, then I will do it." Think if I don't, the karma. So even in this article published in 2011, they're talking about how this is part of the culture. I was just shocked that, like, I mean, I guess living in the time we live in now, I feel like post-Me Too, that would be completely unacceptable. And yet this article was published in 2011 and it seemed like everybody was just like, okay, cool, no big deal. Because it wasn't until March of 2013 that Sarah Bond, who was the first to come forward and break this code of silence and shame that apparently a lot of women had been feeling and operating under, she filed a lawsuit against him. And within days, that story was all over the news, accusing him of sexual assault and rape. So that's when actually it became a big deal. But literally 2 years before, like, you can see the writing on the wall and like nobody's saying anything. It's just wild.
Yep.
After Sarah comes out with her story, other victims start speaking up. And that's where the coverage is born. Like the documentaries start getting made. The whole time, he just denies. And I just find it so hard to believe that there were people in his Bikram community who still stuck by him and supported him. And here's where I think to me, it like really is a cult, because you could argue maybe in the beginning, like it's just like any other fitness trend. People get really into it. They start doing it every day. But I think like at this point where there are facts being presented to you, where maybe before you could have claimed ignorance, but now there are like facts coming out that your guru is not only breaking laws, but seriously harming people. There were still people who stuck by him. And I mean, yes, there were the people who straight out, flat out denied it and said they didn't believe it. But there were also people who said they did believe it, given the environment they had been in themselves, and like they could see how that could evolve into a sexual abuse situation, but still kept their certification as a Bikram instructor and like continued to teach classes. Unfortunately, like these women never really got any justice. There was Sarah, but then 5 other women also brought lawsuits against Bikram, and they were bringing civil lawsuits because actually they brought their accusations to the LAPD and the police didn't do anything about it. So
Really?
the civil courts, were like the only recourse they could get. He continued to deny all the accusations. The court did not find him guilty of these civil charges for any of these assault cases. So he's like on the run right now. And that's because
what?
Like he can't come back to America. There's an arrest warrant for him. That was because another woman sued him for wrongful termination. So a judge ordered Bikram to hand over much of what remained of his fortune. In May of 2017, a warrant was issued for the arrest of Bikram, but not for sexual assault. The warrant was for refusing to pay what he owed, and that's why he fled the country.
Ridiculous.
Yeah. So he's
where is he
currently, I mean, I guess he was in Canada in 2023 giving a talk, supposedly. Like, he's just traveling the world, just outside of the US, still teaching yoga. Nothing has really changed. Like, Bikram still exists. His studio still exists. He's still doing the same thing, just not in the United States. So yeah, it's a very unsatisfactory ending. He's currently not being held accountable in any way. Crazy.
Absolutely crazy. I wonder if there's still people who are huge stands, though. I mean, I guess if there's studios out
No, I
still.
think there are. Yeah. That part really blows my mind. I don't know. It's part of what being in a cult is like, right? I mean, obviously, there's the suicide cults where you believe in it so much that you end up taking your own life. But there's also like the Manson murders and like those cults where you are harming other people actively, but your whole worldview is changed so much that that's just like the norm to you. So I
Mhm.
imagine that people in his community who really, really believed in him and felt they had these spiritual, personal transformations with him, that even when these facts come out, I guess he's still denying them. So I guess they can just choose to be like, well, I believe him instead of these women.
Yeah. Crazy. Well, let's hope he doesn't come back. Or maybe he does. Let's hope he does come back. Justice for the
Yeah, I
victims.
hope he goes to jail. Let's move on. Tell me about the cargo cults. I don't really know anything about this, so I'm very excited to hear what you found.
Yes. So this cult is a very, very different kind of cult. This is a true religious cult, like in the sense of Greek bacchanalia type cults. So the cargo cults are a religious movement in the South Pacific in an area called Melanesia. And this is an area stretching from New Guinea to the Fiji Islands. The brief overview, just so you have a sense of what's going on here. In the 1850s, these islands were heavily colonized by European forces. And then, of course, in World War II, there were a ton of Western military forces on these islands. Indigenous people either had experiences with very intense wipeout of their culture via colonialism, or they've never interacted with Westerners before and never had seen modern goods even. It's a very heavily indigenous, nomadic type of people that live there, even to this day. So when they come into contact with the missionaries or with the soldiers, they started to believe that they were magical beings that had information that they didn't have. They had goods that they didn't have. And then they formed a sort of cult ritual around these, in their minds, magical beings. On its face, this sounds absolutely ridiculous. And you're like, what's going on here? But it goes so much deeper
Okay.
than this. What I had seen originally and what got me interested in it is the John Frum movement. This is on Tanna Island in Vanuatu, which is where some of Survivor was filmed, if you've ever seen Survivor.
No, and that
And
literally sounds like a made-up island name. That's crazy. Vanuatu?
I
That's
know.
cool.
Well, it's a collection of like 80 different islands. Tanna Island is an extremely remote island. And I had seen on TikTok film of these islanders wearing American flags and like American military garb. And they were making satellite dishes out of straw and tanks out of straw and doing this whole like American military parade. They're worshiping John Frum, and it's on February 15th, and it's this cargo cult. And
Sorry,
they think that
what is John from? Like, is
we'll
that a
get there.
person? Okay.
It's a person, but
Okay.
I didn't know what it was either at the time. These islanders believe if they worship the spirit of American soldier John Frum, that they will get cargo and get goods from him. And they're
Okay.
still doing it to this day. And I'm like, okay, I'm sure there is so much more to this story. So I got to dig into this. And then that is where we are now. So in Melanesian culture, riches are very important. Like material goods and riches are extremely important. And they believe that there is a spiritual component to materialism. So the better they are as people, the more they pray, the more material goods they will have. They are also extremely influenced by local prophets and charismatic characters. So you combine all of these pieces together and it kind of sets the stage for this cargo cult to take place. These local prophets in the 1850s, even to the existing cargo cults now, claim to have direct communication with the Western spirits and greater ancestral spirits that tell them if they have greater social harmony in the community and if they continue to engage in their traditional rituals like dancing and marching, that their revived cultural traditions will bring them more material goods through cargo.
Okay, so even before the arrival of these American GIs or military presence, this was already a part of their culture. If you are a good person, you will have material wealth granted towards you.
Yeah, that was already the culture and part of the religion. So what happens in the 1850s when you start getting the missionaries and the colonial forces? Unfortunately, the local culture starts getting wiped out because the missionaries come in and they start banning all of the pagan practices. They try to convert everyone to Christianity. They suppress even, do you know what kava is?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I've never had it. Have you?
No, but I've
Okay.
heard a lot about it. I feel like it's a big thing now.
For those who don't know what kava is, it's a plant and it gets you a little high. There's varying strengths of it, but in the Melanesian Islands, they drink some of the strongest kava in the world. And they'll do this every night. And so they
Every night.
get in
Wow.
touch with, yeah, it's like a spiritual religious
Mhm.
practice for them. The missionaries were banning kava as well. They started to believe that when they would see the American military presence and what they viewed as positive Western forces, that it was a sign that the apocalypse was going to happen. So another major tenet of their religion is that eventually there's going to be an apocalypse where everything is turned upside down. They say literally that white men will turn into black poppins, poppins will become whites, crops will grow on trees, and coconuts and fruits will grow in the ground like tubers. Everything will be flipped upside down. They want to bring about the apocalypse because they will eventually get the riches that they think are owed to them because the white people and the Westerners have them now, and then eventually it'll be their turn. So when they would get the cargo ships, they're like, this will be our liberation from colonialism. So it has very, very deep roots in their like personal independence and liberation as a people, which is very interesting.
Wait, so before the missionaries, before they were even exposed to white people, they had this saying where white people were part of it, or this got created once they were exposed to white people?
It got created once they were exposed. They always had this idea that there was going to be an apocalyptic event that would turn everything upside down. But then once they were introduced to Western riches, they were like, oh, during this apocalyptic event, we will be the ones that have the riches.
I see.
These people have it now. It's going to get flipped onto us. Like we're sort of suffering now, but we'll be the ones that are in a position of power.
Mm-hmm.
So they saw the arrival of cargo and goods as a sign from the ancestors that the apocalypse was coming. And so they would start praying and doing rituals to bring about more goods and more cargo. And like, this is the riches. This is the oncoming of the apocalypse happening.
Yeah. But when the cargo came, like, it's not like that cargo was there for the islanders. The cargo was there for the soldiers, right? So, like, were they actually getting any of that wealth?
They were. So during World War II, the American GIs would give local entities like Coke and gum, chocolate, money, like anything they could because they wanted to make allies with the local population.
Okay.
And they would also build hospitals there for the soldiers, obviously, but then they would like treat the local people.
Got it.
Oh, they were also given like radios and stuff that they didn't know about. And then were like, this is magical goods. They loved it, wanted more. So what's really interesting, though, is most of these cults died out by the 1970s. In the 1970s, a lot of these islands gained independence, like Fiji gained independence, New Guinea. However, on some of the more remote islands, like in Tanna Island, where the John Frum movement existed, it's still around. They still celebrate this every year on February 15th. And I read an article in Scientific American where a reporter went down with a translator and spent the day with the Tanna people and tried to ask them like all of these questions about, do you really believe that John is here? Like, where is his spirit? And the answers were fascinating. So they truly believe that John Frum in the 1930s came to them and told them, you need to start practicing your local religion more. Screw the Scottish missionaries that are here and telling you not to drink kava, not to do your dances. Your power lies with your culture. They were like, this guy knows exactly what he's talking about. Like, this is a man that was sent to us by our ancestors to get in touch with ourselves again. And so they started worshiping him. And he also brought them radios, TVs, Coke, medicine, all of this. So they pray to him still to this day to help themselves get back in touch with their local culture, but also for the cargo goods, of course. And they believe that he lives in the volcano. And they say that John Frum told them to pray to him and that he would give them more cargo. So I don't know if that's what actually happened. I really hope John Frum did not tell these people to pray to him, but I wouldn't be surprised. But it's truly, truly wild. They quite literally construct landing strips for airplanes in their fields. And they made piers for cargo ships to come in, thinking that they were eventually going to come bring them all of this cargo. One local man was quoted as saying, John is a spirit. He knows everything. He's even more powerful than Jesus. He said, I'm a Christian now, but most people on Tanna still believe in John Frum, and I still believe in John Frum in my heart. If we keep praying to John, he'll come back with plenty of cargo.
Wow. So, but John came in the 1930s. It's been many years since then. So, I mean, no one has come, I assume. Like, how they're just like, they have faith. We'll just wait.
They'll just wait. So again, this reporter goes down and asks the same exact questions of them. Like, what are you waiting for? In Melanesian culture, it's like so deeply rooted to have prophets and like these sort of wise men, and they drink so much kava. What will happen is the wise men go off into a remote part by the volcano and they drink kava, and then they come back and say, well, John Frum talked to us and told us that he's going to come, but we just have to keep praying. We have to keep abiding by our rituals. truthfully, it's probably at this point a way for them to convince the other islanders to keep doing their local rituals, because that's at least gladly the basis of what John Frum told them to do.
Mm-hmm.
So that was at least a positive thing.
It's strange because it's, on the one hand, it's like their local rituals in the sense of it is aligned with what they believed before the missionaries came in terms of, material wealth and whatnot. But then it's also a total bastardization because obviously worshiping John Frum is not the original local religion or whatever.
Truly. No, I know it's such a paradox because you look at it and like they paint themselves in American flag colors. There's all of this American memorabilia all over the place. Even at the time they were quoted as saying Roosevelt is the kind king of America. Yet they're doing it because they want to keep their local culture.
Yeah.
It's just so fascinating how that worked out. But the way it had been touted on TikTok and even some of just like the more cursory articles I was reading that didn't get too deep, they made it sound like what they're really praying for is more material goods.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, that is a component of it. Anthropologists get upset when people start talking about cargo cults because obviously it's so fascinating. There are a lot of articles and research pieces about it. It's really more in pursuit of preservation of their culture and the desire for independence and liberation from colonialism is really what is at the base of this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And the people who live on these islands today, they are not like connected to the internet at all still. Has it been preserved in that way? Because I feel like if they're on TikTok, like, they would see a lot of material wealth that isn't coming to them.
Right. Right. There are some areas that are still, yes, very remote. They live in the indigenous ways, but obviously some parts of the country are more developed. Yeah.
Fascinating.
So I just want to put out a little disclaimer here that a lot of anthropologists say that the term cargo cult is overly simplistic, perhaps even derogatory, and it's an outsider's construct that fails to capture the complexity of everything that's going on with these. So when you talk about cargo cults with your friends, just know it's about liberation, not necessarily about worshiping Westerners, because that's what really got me. I was like, there's got to be more to this because it's kind of framed in this like, oh, these islanders are worshiping Americans. I'm like, there's no way that that's actually what's going on. And turns out it's not. So
yeah, that's super interesting. I can't believe there's not a documentary about this cult yet.
I know. You think there would be. It was the most studied topic in anthropological research in the 1950s and 60s. So there's actually a ton of research papers out about this, but I felt really uncomfortable reading them, quite frankly, because like the language was so different in the 50s and 60s.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't as progressive as it is now. The language is more like the islanders are worshiping the white man. I'm like, I really hate reading this. I don't like how this is framed at all. So the more modern stuff is definitely more comfortable to read. The Scientific American article that I read where the reporter went down and like their framing of it was obviously like much more palatable. But I am really shocked that there's not a more modern documentary into this. But I think part of it might be because it's really, really difficult to go down and research and talk to these local communities because they're very isolated, extremely remote, and it's really hard to find even translators that can help them conduct this kind of research. So.
Yeah, it's interesting, like, what we choose to call a cult versus just a religious movement. I mean, obviously, I'm not very familiar with this religion you're describing, but I guess in the Christian context, it feels clear because there's mainstream Christianity, and then these groups that isolate themselves, we call cults because they adopt these, like, very niche beliefs. But in this context, it's just fascinating that we call that a cult. Is it an offshoot from a main religion that they practice there? Or why is it even a cult?
We do have Christian cults, though. Like we have the mystic Christian cults, the more pagan cults. They even called themselves cults. So I think in the religious context, being a cult isn't the same thing as what we think of more as social cults or like these like completely made up religions. It's like a subgroup that has a very specialized niche belief system within a larger religious framework. And yeah, to your point, it is like kind of splitting hairs here on what we're saying is legitimate religion versus a cult. But I don't think in the context of religion saying cult illegitimizes a belief system necessarily. And even I found this interesting. Some of these cargo cults are recognized by the local municipalities and they're active political groups even on the islands.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the original definition of a cult is just like a group of people who believe strongly in a specific thing. I feel like the emotion we associate with cult nowadays is often very sinister, I think, because a lot of the coverage has been about these cults that have committed violence to themselves or others.
Totally.
Well, hopefully you guys enjoyed this as much as we did. I thought it was fascinating to do research on this.
There has to be a documentary somewhere on these cargo cults. I'm all in on this. I think it's so fascinating. So I'll be doing more research after this, even just for myself.
Yeah, I definitely have to watch the Bikram Yoga documentary.
Yeah,
I just didn't have enough time, but I did a lot of like video and audio research via podcast. I have to see him in his Speedo and like see if I can understand the charisma, you know?
When you're like, he only wears a black Speedo, I'm like, this man is like the Steve Jobs of yoga.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, guys.
We'll see you next week.
Bye. If you enjoy the pod, we would love for you to give us a follow and rate us on Apple Podcasts, which helps us get the word out and reach new listeners. Full transcripts and show notes are available on Patreon, where if you choose to become a patron, you'll also get access to bonus content, our monthly book club, and our eternal gratitude.
If you'd like to get in touch or suggest a topic for a future episode, email us at everythingiknowaboutpod@gmail.com or DM us across all socials at EikaPod, that's EIKA pod. Thanks for listening and see you next week.